So how many of us here, how many of the people do we know have been struck by a devastating diagnosis, perhaps all too early in life, hit down by something truly incurable? In the last 12 months, even despite 20 years as a doctor, 30 years as a geek, and 6 years in this exponential medicine community, I've come to realize just how much more differently and broadly we have to think if we're truly going to address incurable diseases like untreatable cancers. Not just for the billionaires, but for the billions. Not just for those people who have access to concierge precision medicine, but universally accessible for all. To help me discuss this evening, I'm honored to have with me the body that belongs to this foot. That's Parker over there, and me on the beach yesterday, drawing out a data architecture, not with our toes, this was with our fingers actually, about how you go about making research in adaptive combination therapies in complex incurable diseases something that you can roll out nationally and internationally. A little bit about Parker. I was honored to meet him actually as a result of something that came out of Singularity University. After 2012, I started a little company called Centrion, which did predictive analytics, looking for patterns in people who deteriorated in hospitals and at home. And he, at the time, was helping the technology program at Great Ormond Street, the famous children's hospital. And it was there that I was asked to speak to him about what Centrion could do for kids in neonatal wards. Parker's an incredible individual. You'll hear his story from himself in a moment. But this is the kind of stuff that we are now working on together. The current status quo, of course, if you get really complex, serious diagnosis, is you get a treatment based on old data. How do we turn this into this? Where the data from every person, like the person that you're seeing, is being driven by deep molecular understanding of the problem, going through layers not only of human intelligence, but of artificial intelligence, and not presented deep in the pages of journals, but in the next generation of user interfaces that help us to make better, earlier decisions. And we need to do this because things like untreatable cancers are not single diseases. They are complex webs of problems. It's like not trying to find just one needle in a haystack, but 20 fast-moving needles in a haystack, all colluding with each other to try and outwit whatever you throw at them. And the reason I'm here with Parker is because we're working together on a program that was started as a result of the sad passing of a brilliant, famous, and wonderful woman, a politician in the UK called Baroness Tessa Jowell, who earlier this year passed away despite access to every single conceivable treatment you can imagine of glioblastoma multiforme, one of the hardest and most difficult to treat cancers of them all. And what Parker and I are working on now is a national grid for smart trials, sponsored by the UK government, working across all the different divisions of the UK and internationally, in order to not only treat people, but truly study how we treat people with currently incurable cancers. So before I bring Parker on stage, I just want to spend 3 minutes showing you a small edited movie which highlights and helps us remember the reason why we're all here. If you don't mind playing the movie, please.
I'm Vanessa, and I have cancer, and I'm 4.
For half her life, Vanessa has been facing neuroblastoma, a very rare type of cancer. Her family have watched her go through countless painful procedures.
I've got 2 sisters, and one's called Ruby and one's called Zoe. They're a bit of a handful, right?
Because of the treatments Vanessa has gone through, she has spent over 800 nights in hospital.
I live in a hospital. My sisters spend their time at home.
When Vanessa's away from us, we call her all the time. She's been through some really rough times.
I'm tired. What are you having for dinner? Spaghetti. I love mozzarella. I especially love mozzarella. Every time I do something like a procedure or something like that, I get one of these beads, and each bead is very special. These ones are how many times I've lost my hair.
You got how many times?
4. I love singing. La la. Ah. I like to sing a lot. A lot. A lot. Yeah. On my own, pretending he's beside me. All alone, I walk with him till morning. Without him, I feel his arms around me. And when I lose my way, I close my eyes, and he has found me.
This summer, Vanessa started a new course of treatment, the last available, and the last chance at saving Vanessa's life.
This trial has only just been launched, and we're taking a risk by hoping. But realistically, it's very unlikely that she'll make it. Every day counts now.
Despite the incredible work of Great Ormond Street Hospital, it became clear that there was nothing more that could be done for Vanessa. And on the 6th of September this year, Vanessa left hospital for the last time to spend some precious moments with her friends, family and loved ones.
Please welcome on stage Parker Moss.
You see, Brits can hug too.
So Parker, this is just a year since the passing of Vanessa. Tell us a little bit about the journey and how do you feel watching this today?
Yeah, it's great seeing her up on the screen, actually. Vanessa had an incredibly long journey. I slept 800 nights on the ward with her over a period of 5 years. We got her back into remission 3 times, which is why she lost her hair 4 times, as she explained. And she really did go through everything. So induction chemo, she had 3 bone marrow transplants. We split her sternum to take a tumor that was wrapped around her spine behind her heart. We emptied her bowels out to remove a tumor that was kind of wrapped around her small intestines. She had a monoclonal antibody in the UK. We took her to Sloan Kettering in New York for a bivalent vaccine, which didn't work. She lived for a month in a sealed lead-lined room, having interventional radiology, and eventually died on a actually, she was one of the first children to have a GD2 CAR T therapy, so solid cancer, solid tumor CAR T. It was incredible what she went through. She had spent 300 hours in radiology machines, unsedated. We aspirated her pelvis 27 times, one of those post-mortem through the same hole each time. She had 3 cardiac arrests before she was 8 years old. Months in intensive care, like 8 or 9 months on ketamine, morphine, IV. she'd lost 21 of her friends before she turned 8, friends from the ward. And actually, just in the last week, 2 of the very last remaining friends from her days on the ward have died. So, even after the loss, he was still very involved in the cancer community. So it's been a really intense journey, and a sad journey. But ultimately, if you ask how I feel now, I mean, I find it uplifting to see Vanessa. Probably the one thing that I've read, and I read this after Vanessa died, which kind of contoured the shape of my grief more than anything I've read before, is a book by Viktor Frankl called Man's Search for Meaning, which is a really amazing book written by this Viennese psychoanalyst who survived Auschwitz and lost most of his family at Auschwitz. And he said, poignantly, he said, when everything is taken away from a man, the one thing that is remaining, the one thing that can never be taken away, is how we respond to circumstances. And when we think about that kind of wisdom, we tend to think about it with people like Viktor Frankl, like Maya Angelou, the great titans, intellectual titans. But when I see a video of my daughter, and I watched that many times, one thing, this wasn't just staged for this film, and she was smiling the entire time. And as she said on the film, in confronted with the very worst, she just sang. And I think the thing that leaves me with is that this ability to find strength and to choose happiness is something that is not just available to the kind of wise and the learned. It's available to all of us as children, and our responsibility as adults is not to forget that gift.
And we've now been working together for 12 months on the brain cancer mission and the smart grid. How has the last 12 months helped you frame what you're going to do in future?
Well, I mean, it's completely changed my life. I had a strange career experience as a result of my daughter, because I had a sensible job in the telecom sector. I didn't know anything about healthcare. I really had not been very involved in any hospitals. But a couple of months into my time at Great Ormond Street, whilst I was impressed by the kind of clinical excellence of the hospital, I was just shocked and horrified by how operationally and technically weak the hospital was. And I couldn't resist sticking my considerable nose into hospital business. And to cut long story short, they ultimately hired me to lead the technology strategy and transformation plan. So I was...
That's how I met you.
That's how we met. So I was kind of on the executive team, reporting to the medical director, who's a cardiothoracic surgeon, a famous heart transplant surgeon in London. And then at night, sleeping on the ward, watching in my pajamas the nurses using the technology that we were trying to transform. So it was an amazing experience. I went up the learning curve very quickly, and I ended up getting very involved in the UK in your adaptive trial program, and also I'm on the Matt Hancock, our new Secretary of State's Technology Advisory Board for Health, and various other things. So I've become very involved and very passionate, and today I'm investing for Fidelity only in cancer genomics and the informatics layer on top of cancer. So it is my mission to make an impact in this world.
It's very good that we've got people like you outside of medicine really dedicating your life to try and help us fix it. So tell me about the future of how you see us tackling incurable diseases. Have you got a framework or a guidance, some principles we can follow?
Yeah, and there are a few things that I really want to see changed. I'll mention 3 of them. The first thing is I want to make sure we're learning from our data. And what is maddening to me, I mean, all of Vanessa's phenotypes were captured in Biro. They have contributed nothing to even the static written in stone evidence base, because Great Ormond Street didn't have an electronic patient record at all, and they're now implementing Epic, or they're about to start worshipping at the altar of Epic. At the very least, I would like to have a digital patient record to capture phenotypes and genotypes. But I'd like to go a lot beyond that, and what I really think we need to do is to have a dynamic platform that captures real-world evidence so that we can be learning from patients, all patients, not just patients that are on highly curated trials, but from the patients that fail trials, from patients on compassionate treatments who are mostly, lost to science, where their evidence is lost to science. So that's the first thing I want to see. The second thing, I know I'm speaking to an expert audience here, so I mean, we all know that cancer is a heterogeneous disease, but I think what is less understood is how evolving the heterogeneity of it is, and you refer to it as the kind of moving haystack with the shifting needle, and that's really a fair description. We spent 5 years on clinical trials, and at the end of her life on a very experimental phase 1 trial, and as a patient on the ward. We saw this familiar pattern repeat again and again, which is, a patient does tremendously well from frontline treatment. They have a massive response to induction chemo. Tumor shrinks by 85%. Surgeon's all excited because he can remove it. 4 months later, huge relapse. And this is no surprise to the oncologist. Of course, it shocks the patients every time. Why? Because we are actually supplying through chemotherapy the very antigens that give the subpopulation clones treatment resistance. That builds the second wave and the third wave, and my daughter relapsed 3 times due to that. So I really want to start thinking of cancer as more of a chess game where we can adapt based on biomarkers. I'm really excited about liquid biopsy and how that can reveal kind of points of adaptation. And I want to be able to plan multiple steps ahead so that we can start managing this heterogeneity. I can never say that damn word. And I want to be doing that with multi-omics and sequencing. And then maybe lastly, people say that hope is not a strategy, but actually it is a strategy if you're on a cancer pathway. You need hope. We were on the ward for 5 years. We were, mostly inpatients. You can't get through a period like that without hope. But even if you know that you're on a fated, hopeless journey, I am still part of a community, and I celebrate every time I meet a survivor. I met a wonderful pediatric survivor just this morning here, who actually was one of your patients, Daniel. So that gives us all hope. And adaptive trials, I think, are an important part of the hope strategy for 2 reasons. Even if you know that it won't provide a cure for your child, at least you feel you're contributing dynamically in an agile way to the evidence base. And then lastly, it allows us to speak authentically to our family members, and in my case to Vanessa's 2 sisters, to say with true authenticity that we did absolutely everything that could be done. And that is a massive part of the healing process. The fact that my daughter died on a phase 1 trial and we took her to the threshold of science, it has made her loss much easier.
Obviously only accessible to a few at the moment rather than globally accessible. I mean, we've got to come a long way, though. Your daughter had access to an incredible amount of diagnostics and therapies, but you told me that you know more about your dog's microbiome genetics than the average person knows about their cancer genetics. Tell us about this funny story. This is very funny.
This is a classic London. So my parents live in a very nice part of London. They have access to this private garden, and occasionally they look after my puppy. We bought a puppy just after Vanessa died, and in order for the puppy to have access to this private garden, we actually had to sequence its poo. And the reason for that is if they catch any dog poo in the garden, they sequence it and then they identify the dog. And first strike, your key gets deactivated for 3 months, and the second strike, 6 months, and the third strike, you're done. So basically, we know more about my dog's genome than my other 2 daughters. So that it kind of tells you that there's something wrong.
If we don't do that in cancer, but we can do that for your puppy's poop, we have a bit of a way to go. But at least we have a plan of getting there.
Yeah.
Is there any sort of final closing thoughts you'd like us to take home as we all go and implement what we absorb here over the next few days?
Well, I would like to speak to the oncologists in the room. I've really become friends with the oncology community. I actually go skiing with my daughter's oncologist now every year. And I know how hard it is, and I'm grateful to all of you. I've met a lot of oncologists and hematologists and immunologists, immuno-oncologists in the last couple of days. And I just want to say from the patient perspective, I hope that seeing my daughter and seeing how much of an impact your research and the care that you deliver has made on people like me, please find the strength to keep going, because I think we're at an inflection point. It feels like we're not decades now, but years away from really, really improving survivorship. And so, thank you to the doctors.
What I've learned from you, Parker, is, aside from you being a huge inspiration to me, and thank you for becoming part of this community, that we've got to be able to get our data much more broadly shared and acted upon in real time. We have to move away from not only studying things with RCTs, but with ACTs, adaptive combination therapies, and that hope is not just a dream, it's actually a part of the therapy. And that also, I think, if you are going to cure the incurable, you shouldn't just hire credible people, you should hire incredible people. Please, big round of applause for Parker Moss.
Thank you. Cheers, man.
Well done.
Thanks. Thanks, man.
So I actually trained as a pediatric oncologist, and one of the things about pediatric oncology, which has been a lesson for other fields, is that most kids are on clinical trials, and that's led some incurable patients to become curable, and has catalyzed advancements in adult cancer care as well. So my very first patient, as a pediatric fellow, was always an interesting thing to remember, had what became a curable cancer. I'd had patients like Vanessa with neuroblastoma who did not make it. This summer I get an email out of the blue, "Hey, it's your old patient, Joseph. You remember me?" I'm like, "Yes, of course I remember you. My very first pediatric oncology patient." And lo and behold, he is now a medical student. And lo and behold, he's here at Exponential Medicine. And my first reunion with Joseph Tang. Quick visit. You've grown a little bit. You were 8 years old when you were diagnosed. What do you remember, and how's it impacted the rest of your life?
I remember pretty much being pulled out of my normal, regular, happy living and being transplanted into the ICU. And then for the next about 5 months or so, I was just in the hospital. However, Dr. Kraft still looks as young as ever. He doesn't look like he's aged. But to be honest, I was very fortunate because I don't really remember anything negative. I only remember he took really good care of me. The volunteers were wonderful. The nurses would come and they would render a very holistic, all-inclusive care to my being. And so I think that plus my strong support from family and friends really caused me to have a positive, well, it wasn't a positive experience, but I think I got everything positive out of it. And so at that time, after I entered remission, I just felt like I had to continue to see my friends in the wards, and I think this was just an inherent desire that my personal experience would not remain individualized, but that it would actually become something that could benefit others. And so working with patients, pediatric patients, I've volunteered in all different sorts of respects, palliative pediatrics and whatnot, and I think it's really allowed me, my experience has really allowed me to comfort, encourage other children, and even my parents were able to comfort and encourage other families. And so now I'm in medical school with the hope that I would continue to be able to personally render care. I've been a patient, I've been a volunteer, now I would like to complete the circle and become a physician.
So this is what's at stake. So this is what's at stake when we go from incurable to curable. So thank you, Joseph, and thanks for what you'll do for your future patients. Onwards. Thanks.